The evening was buzzing with excitement as the fancy restaurant filled with chatter and the clinking of glasses. It was the kind of place where the food was expensive and the atmosphere was filled with elegance. Most of the guests were dressed in expensive outfits, eager to enjoy a meal that would match their status. Among them, one woman stood out, a wealthy, confident woman who clearly believed she belonged in a class of her own. Her laughter echoed across the room as she and her friends made themselves comfortable at their table, already planning the next part of their night. The woman, full of confidence, barely looked at the menu before ordering with a flick of her wrist, her voice laced with impatience. The waiter approached their table to take their order. It was a typical evening shift, but for the young waitress who was serving the table, it felt different. She had been working here for a while, juggling between long shifts and chasing after her dreams. Despite the restaurant's fancy atmosphere, she knew the job was just a stepping stone for something bigger. As she carefully placed the drinks in front of the group, the woman barely looked up, too busy chatting with her friends. "Is that the best they could do?" she muttered, loud enough for the waitress to hear. She glanced down at her attire, simple, clean and neat, and thought nothing of it. It was just another comment from someone who assumed their wealth and status made them better than others. The waitress smiled, politely excusing herself from the table, but inside, the sting of the comment lingered. She had learned over time, and not to let such remarks get to her, but it wasn't always easy. The truth was, she wasn't just a waitress, she had dreams, big ones, and they didn't involve serving at tables. She had moved to the city with nothing but hope and determination, hoping that one day she would find a way to make her dreams come true. For now, the restaurant was the place where she could pay the bills and keep working toward her passion, singing. As the evening went on, the woman continued to make little remarks about the staff. Every time the waitress came to the table, there was a new snide comment about her job or appearance. The woman didn't see beyond the surface. She saw only the waitress's uniform, not the ambition or the talent she carried with her. She couldn't see the late nights spent practicing songs or the hope in the waitress's heart that one day her big break would come. The waitress, however, was used to it. She had faced many people like the woman, people who looked down on her and underestimated her. But with every insult, her resolve grew stronger. She would show them that their judgment meant nothing. One day, she would make them realize that they had no idea who they were dealing with. She had a gift, and it wasn't going to stay hidden forever. The waitress had always known that she was meant for more than just serving food. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy her job. She did. She liked meeting new people and always made sure to provide the best service she could, no matter how tough her day was. But deep down, she knew her true calling was far away from restaurant tables. She had dreams that stretched far beyond this job, dreams that kept her going even on the hardest days. She had grown up in a small town, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. It wasn't the kind of place where big dreams came true, but she was different. She had always loved music, especially singing. As a little girl, she would stand in front of the mirror, pretending she was on stage, imagining the applause and the bright lights. Her parents, however, didn't share her passion for music. They wanted her to take a more traditional path, one that promised a stable job and a secure future. But she couldn't ignore the pull of music, so when she turned 18, she packed up and moved to the city, hoping to make her dreams a reality. The city was nothing like she had imagined. It was big, fast-paced, and sometimes overwhelming. She struggled to find her footing at first, working odd jobs just to get by. She spent hours sending her demo tapes to music studios, hoping someone would hear her voice and offer her a chance. But those opportunities never came. Instead, she found herself working long shifts at the restaurant to pay her bills. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was a way to survive. And as much as she hated the idea of settling for something she didn't want, she kept reminding herself that it was temporary. Every day, after her shift, she would come home exhausted, but still determined to work on her singing. She recorded herself singing songs, watched tutorials to improve her technique, and dreamt of the day when someone would finally notice her. She knew it would take time, but she believed it was possible. Music was in her heart, and she refused to let go of that dream. There were days when doubt crept in, when it felt like the world was too big and her dreams were too small to be noticed. But then she would remind herself of why she came to the city in the first place, to follow her passion, no matter how hard it was. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to keep going, one step at a time. The rude comments from customers like the woman earlier in the evening didn't sting as much anymore. They only fueled her determination to prove that she was more than what people saw on the surface. She was going to make it, and one day, everyone would see her for who she really was. The woman at the table didn't stop. It was as if she had a personal mission to make the waitress feel as small as possible. Every time the waitress approached their table, the comments became more cutting. There was one about the way she tied her hair back, too messy, not professional enough. Another about the uniform, saying it looked too plain for such a fancy place. The woman even dared to ask, "How long do you think you'll be working here anyway?" As if she was somehow entitled to judge the waitress's life choices. With each comment, the waitress smiled politely, doing her best to maintain composure. She had been through worse. In fact, she had heard far more hurtful things during her time in the city. But still, there was something about this woman. Her arrogance, her belief that money and status gave her the right to look down on others, that made the words cut deeper. The waitress had worked with all kinds of customers. Some were kind, some were indifferent. And then there were those like the woman, people who saw others as nothing more than a means to an end. To them, the staff didn't matter. They were invisible. But to the waitress, every person she met had a story. She always tried to treat everyone with respect, whether they were a customer or a fellow worker. After all, she wasn't just serving food, she was serving people. And everyone deserved dignity, no matter their role in life. But the woman didn't care about dignity. She was too caught up in her own world of privilege and entitlement. Each snide comment from her made the waitress feel more and more invisible, like she was nothing more than a figure to serve, not a person with hopes, dreams, or ambitions. The woman's friends laughed at her jokes, reinforcing the sense of superiority she carried with her like an invisible crown. It was as if they were all in on the joke, and the waitress was the punchline. Despite all this, the waitress remained calm. It wasn't easy, but she had learned long ago not to let the negativity of others define her. She had a purpose, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Even though she was being mocked by the woman at the table, she knew that this moment, this little exchange, didn't define who she was. The woman didn't know her story, her struggles, or her dreams. She didn't know that every rude word thrown her way only pushed her closer to her goal. The waitress turned away from the table, her heart pounding with a mix of frustration and determination. She had long learned not to take these insults to heart, but that didn't mean they didn't sting. Deep down, she knew she was better than the way people like the woman saw her. She was destined for something bigger, and one day they would all realize it. One day, her moment would come, and she would shine brighter than any of them could have ever imagined. The night continued, and as the restaurant buzzed with energy, a sudden announcement caught the attention of the guests. The lights dimmed, slightly, and the staff made their way to the center of the dining area, carrying with them an air of excitement. A few murmurs spread through the room as people started whispering about a special live performance that was scheduled for the evening. Some of the guests seemed intrigued, while others remained indifferent, not interested in anything other than their meals. For the woman sitting at the table, however, this announcement was nothing more than a distraction. She barely looked up from her conversation with her friends, dismissing the idea of a live performance with a bored wave of her hand. "Probably just some amateur singer," she muttered, not even bothering to make eye contact with the staff member who had made the announcement. To her, it was just another routine part of the evening, one she didn't need to pay attention to. She was here for the food, the luxury, and the status, not for something as trivial as live music. The waitress, however, had a different reaction. She had heard the whispers among the staff earlier in the evening about a surprise performance, but she hadn't thought much of it. She had been busy with her usual tasks, trying to keep the evening running smoothly. But now, as the lights lowered and the excitement grew, she couldn't ignore the flutter of nerves in her stomach. She had been selected to perform that night, and though she had practiced her songs countless times, the thought of singing in front of a crowd still made her heart race. She had kept her singing a secret from most of the staff and customers, afraid of being judged or ridiculed. She had always kept her passion for music to herself, sharing it only with a few close friends who understood her dreams. The waitress had never imagined that one day she would be the one standing in front of an audience, singing her heart out. But tonight was different. She had been given an unexpected opportunity, and despite the nervousness, she was determined to take it. As she made her way backstage to prepare for the performance, she couldn't help but overhear a few more comments from the customers. "I can't believe they're letting a waitress perform," one woman said. "What's she going to do, sing for us?" The words stung, but she pushed them aside. She wasn't going to let their opinions stop her. This was her chance to show everyone who she really was, and she wasn't going to waste it. The spotlight was waiting for her, and as she took her place on stage, she felt a surge of confidence that she hadn't expected. This wasn't just a performance, it was a statement. It was her chance to prove that she was more than what they saw on the surface. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a singer, an artist with a dream, and she was ready to make her mark. The room fell silent as the lights dimmed, and all eyes turned to the stage. The audience, expecting an ordinary performance, shifted in their seats, unsure of what to expect. The woman at the table, still lost in her conversation with her friends, barely registered the change in atmosphere. She didn't even glance up as the waitstaff made their way to the back of the room, quietly preparing for the surprise act. To her, this was just another gimmick, a distraction meant to entertain while they ate. Little did she know, tonight was going to be different. The waitress, now backstage, took a deep breath. Her heart raced, but her resolve only grew stronger. She could hear the low murmur of the crowd and the faint hum of anticipation filling the room. It was almost surreal. She had worked in this restaurant for so long, serving countless guests, but tonight she was stepping into the spotlight in a way she had never imagined. She was about to sing in front of them, all the people who had no idea who she really was. The moment she stepped onto the stage, she felt an overwhelming wave of nerves. Her palms were sweaty, and she could feel her heartbeat pounding in her chest. But as she stood there, under the soft glow of the spotlight, something shifted. The nervousness began to fade, replaced by the realization that this was her moment. This was her chance to show the world what she was truly capable of. As the first notes of the music played, the sound filled the room, and she began to sing. Her voice, steady and clear, seemed to carry effortlessly through the air. The audience, initially distracted, fell into a quiet hush. Even the woman at the table, who had been so dismissive just moments earlier, now looked up in surprise. She wasn't expecting this. No one had. But as the waitress's voice grew stronger, something shifted in the room. It wasn't just the sound of music that captivated the audience. It was the emotion behind it, the raw passion and strength that came through every note. The waitress sang from her heart, each word a reflection of her journey, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the determination that had brought her here. She wasn't just performing, she was telling her story. The people who had once viewed her as nothing more than a servant were now witnessing a side of her they could never have imagined. The woman at the table, who had ridiculed her just moments ago, now found herself frozen in place, unable to take her eyes off the performer. The friends who had laughed at her were now silenced, their attention fully captured by the powerful voice before them. As the song came to an end, the room was still. The audience, including the woman and her friends, sat in stunned silence for a moment. It was as if they had all been transported into a different world. one where the waitress was no longer just a worker in a restaurant, but an artist with a gift that commanded respect. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for her voice, it was for her courage, her talent, and the quiet strength she had shown in the face of everything. The woman at the table, her face flushed with embarrassment, slowly clapped her hands, realizing just how wrong she had been. She had belittled the very person who had just shown her what real talent looked like. As the last note of the song lingered in the air, the silence in the room was almost deafening. The waitress stood still, her heart pounding, trying to steady her breath. The crowd, who had been talking and laughing just moments ago, was now utterly still, their eyes locked on her. She couldn't believe it. She had done it. She had sung her heart out in front of an audience, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. It was as if the world had paused just for her. Slowly, the sound of clapping broke the silence. At first, it was just a few people, unsure of what to do. But then, the applause grew louder, more confident, until the entire room was on their feet. The waitress's face flushed with surprise and humility. She had never expected this kind of reaction. Sure, she had hoped for appreciation, but the overwhelming support from the audience was more than she could have dreamed of. She bowed her head, grateful for the applause, but still in awe of what had just happened. The woman at the table, who had earlier made fun of her, sat there in stunned silence. Her mouth was slightly open, and her expression had changed from one of superiority to one of disbelief. The waitress could see it from the stage. Her shocked face, the realization sinking in that she had underestimated the person standing in front of her. The woman had no idea that the person she had belittled, who she had assumed was just another waitress, was now the center of everyone's attention. As the clapping continued, the woman's friends looked around, unsure of how to react. They had been part of the group that had mocked the waitress just a short while ago, but now they seemed embarrassed. The waitress could see the discomfort on their faces, and she wondered if they, too, were beginning to feel the weight of their actions. The applause was no longer just about her performance. It was about their realization of how wrong they had been. When the room finally quieted down, the waitress smiled softly, her nerves slowly melting away. She had done it. She had proved that she was more than just a waitress. She was a performer, a dreamer, and someone who had earned the respect of everyone in the room. As the last few claps faded, she gave a humble nod and left the stage. Back at the table, the woman's expression had changed. She no longer looked like the confident, superior figure she had been earlier. Instead, she looked humbled, maybe even a little ashamed. She glanced down at her drink, unsure of what to say, but her thoughts were clear. She had just learned a powerful lesson in humility. The woman who had once been so quick to judge the waitress was now forced to confront her own arrogance. She had no idea who she had been looking down on, and now she was beginning to understand just how wrong she had been. The waitress had just shown her something important, that talent and worth are not determined by one's job or appearance. It was a realization that would stay with her long after the applause had ended. As the night wound down and the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, something had changed. The woman at the table, still processing the unexpected turn of events, couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. She had come in expecting a quiet, uneventful evening, just another dinner out with friends. Instead, she had witnessed something that would stay with her for a long time. She looked around at her friends, who were now quietly finishing their meals, no longer laughing or making jokes. They too were uncomfortable, having just seen firsthand how wrong they had been. The applause, the shock on their faces, it all made her realize that her earlier actions had been deeply disrespectful. She felt a pang of guilt, something she wasn't used to. She had always prided herself on being successful, on knowing what was best. But tonight she had been reminded that arrogance and assumptions can lead to painful mistakes. The waitress, the person she had looked down on, had shown her the true meaning of talent and perseverance. It wasn't about what you wore or where you worked. It was about what you had inside, about the heart you put into everything you did. And tonight, the woman had witnessed that heart in full force. The waitress, on the other hand, had no idea what was going on in the mind of the woman. She was just relieved that the performance was over and that she had survived the nerves and the uncertainty. She had stepped onto that stage to prove to herself that she wasn't just a face behind a counter, that she had more to offer than what people saw at first glance. And now, as she walked back to the kitchen to continue her shift, she felt a small sense of pride. She had done something that scared her, something that pushed her out of her comfort zone. And it had paid off. The applause still echoed in her mind, and though she tried to push it away, a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. As she returned to the dining area, she passed by the table where the woman and her friends sat. She could see the woman's eyes on her, a look of quiet reflection there. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and the woman gave her a small nod. It wasn't much, but in that brief moment, the waitress knew that the woman had understood something important. It was as if the roles had reversed. The woman who had once looked down on her was now the one who had learned something valuable, something that would change the way she saw the world. The waitress didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She had already proven everything she needed to prove. It wasn't about the woman's acknowledgement or validation. It was about her own journey. She had come to the city with nothing but a dream, and tonight she had taken a giant step toward making that dream a reality. She had stood up for herself. She had faced her fears, and she had shown everyone in that room exactly who she was, and that was enough.